Good afternoon. I'm Addison Pollock. I'm the Director of Community Engagement with AARP Indiana, and I'm pleased to welcome you to our event called The State of Housing in Evansville. And during today's event, we will discuss where things stand with the affordable housing landscape in the city, the relevant actors, groups, and their efforts that are making a difference in the housing sphere, and then recent developments in housing advocacy and what these changes mean for our neighbors 50 plus, their families, and the entire community. AARP Indiana is a champion for making Evansville, among all Hoosier communities, even more livable communities. And an essential ingredient in making that possible is securing the availability of housing that allows older Hoosiers to age in place. It is my honor to kick off today's event by introducing our great speakers. I'm joined by our moderator, who is Janet Kilbane. She serves as the co-leader of AARP Indiana's Community Impact Team in Evansville, Indiana. She's also a retired occupational therapist and former professor with the University of Southern Indiana. She is joined by our two special guests, Dr. Ruth Metzger and Dr. Matt Hanke. Who both are the chairs of the Housing Organizations United Serving Evansville, also known as HOUSE. This is a community coalition established in 2014 to amplify community awareness, resources, advocacy, and support for safe, affordable housing in Evansville. Both also serve on the City of Evansville's Affordable Housing Trust Fund Advisory Committee. So we're lucky to have both of them with us today. I'm going to read their bios just really briefly. Dr. Metzger serves her community as an advocate for affordable housing in Evansville. Her focus is policy and practice that supports affordability, aging in place, smart home technology, and walkable neighborhoods. As a nurse and public health educator, she is concerned with the intersection of the built environment and people's health. And those are all things that AARP Indiana cares about. So we're so glad to have her. And then we're also glad to have Dr. Henke, is the Associate Professor of Political Science at the University of Southern Indiana. He earned his BA in History and Politics from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., and his Master's in Political Science. And he's also PhD in Urban and Public Affairs, both from the University of Louisville. Dr. Henke served as he served as the director of the Master of Public Administration program at USI from 2010 to 2018 and has taught over 20 different courses at both the undergraduate and graduate level. His research interests include housing policy, community development, urban policy and governance, strategic planning, and social capital. So thank you both for being here. We're excited to kick off this conversation. Before I hand it over to Janet, though, I want to remind folks who might be watching live, you can submit a question at any time during the program, and we can pull it up, and we can have our panel answer that for you. So, Janet, take it away, and I'll be around at the end for concluding remarks.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Janet Kilbane, as Addison said, and I'm going to be the moderator, the person asking the questions of our two guest speakers, Ruth and Matt. Let's kick this off with some questions about the Housing Organization United that's serving Evansville, or the HOUSE Coalition. Ruth and Matt, you both co-chair this coalition known as Housing Organizations United Serving Evansville, also known as HOUSE. Could you explain what HOUSE is and the role it plays in promoting affordable housing in Evansville?
The Housing Organizations United Serving Evansville, or HOUSE, is a collaboration of nonprofit and for-profit developers, property owners, housing advocates, bankers, and interested citizens from the community. And we meet monthly to discuss the issues we problem solve as a group. For example, several months ago, we had a major issue with a apartment housing complex in Evansville that a large number of people needed to move out of, and the group collaborated to help those people find new places to live. So, Matt? You're muted.
You're muted.
the mayor's roundtable. So when Lloyd Winnicky became mayor of Evansville, he brought folks working in housing issues together, and House outgrew from that. House also serves as the working group for the Promise Zone. So Evansville received a designation in 2016 for the Promise Zone, a designation in order to get federal funding to our area. There's 22 distressed zones throughout the United States, and Evansville qualified for one. And part of their goals are 6 working groups, and the housing working group is House. The House predates it, but it in no sense of reinventing the wheel, so it serves both purposes.
Okay, thank you. Next question. Aside from the news that we'll discuss shortly, are there any updates or news related to House that you would like to share at this point in time?
In terms of specific plans,
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Well, House is kind of going through. We went through about last fall. We went through a process that was aligned with this initiative called Talent 2025 out of United Way of Southwest Indiana, and that was to more or less clarify the issue greater of what the needs of are for affordable housing. And we went through this process collectively with our House partners, with our House members, and out of it came a report that demonstrates the housing needs and illustrates what are the pressing needs in our community. And from that, we're hoping that a constructive dialogue to create a overall comprehensive neighborhood housing strategy can be formed. Perhaps a community gathering of a housing summit that may not happen for a while, but out of that came this greater understanding of this need for affordable housing. Just to clarify it, a lot of our members do have different approaches to House in terms of what level of involvement they want to be in. And so Ruth and I as co-chairs are just clarifying that. There may be some who simply want to come to House to share information, exchange information. Others may want to be in an advocacy sort of role. So we've been involved in writing to our state legislature, members of the state House and Senate, and members of our congressional delegation on pushing for affordable housing issues. We just sent a letter making sure that the Promise Zone designation and those Promise Zone points we get from that don't expire. And so we have that advocacy role. And so, another role that the capacity of House is to deal with these larger issues. So it's figuring out what level of involvement, because a part of House has to have some sense of value for all the member organizations, because everyone who belongs follows the mission of their specific nonprofit or other entity, and we want House to have a meaningfulness for them. House is simply just a convener of these groups who are discussing affordable housing issues, and 2022 will be a perfect opportunity to sort those out, sort the different levels of engagement our members are going to be in as we move forward strategically.
Yeah, we also, from the Talent 2025 experience, walked away from it with an determination to move from talking to doing. And to get to that step, we realized that this House is not actually a bona fide nonprofit. It's just a collaboration. And we need to drive these things forward. We will need to create an alliance with an organization or different organizations that share this passion and share this interest and have some resources for House to move forward. One of the key things we walked away from was the need for the comprehensive housing strategy for the city of Evansville. This is a recommendation from a report that the city commissions every 2 to 3 years. It's done by Bowen Research, and it has some very excellent and very spot on recommendations for what Evansville needs to do. And the key one there is the comprehensive housing strategy. Now, it has many pieces, and it will require a great deal of coordination, communication, planning. Needs to have the right people involved in moving it forward. So we're having some continuing conversations surrounding how that might happen.
Okay. Are there any long-term aspirations for the House Coalition? Um, for 5, 10 years down the line?
I think a long-term aspiration certainly would be House continuing to be this convener, having developed a comprehensive neighborhood housing strategy, or being the convener of such an approach, and perhaps maybe being its own 501c of its own entity. There's enormous value of having a clearinghouse convening group that brings everyone together to come up with strategies, plans, and advocacy. So it would be great if House could have the capacity to have someone work her at full time to carry a lot of these goals and objectives through.
Yeah.
But because Ruth and I are volunteers, and everybody who is a part of House is there because of the hat they wear from the organization they belong to. So it's not unheard of, unreasonable to think that in 5-10 years we will have realized that and really see us follow through on some of the suggestions Ruth made. The city gets this report every couple of years, and that's the one thing we're going to try to thread the needle, put the missing pieces in, is a effective strategy that we understand strategically our housing needs. And strategic planning sometimes doesn't catch on with a lot of folks, but the city strategic planning is important for cities and communities. We often sort of look at it from the businesses and organizations, but this is a great approach. It could tie into an overall city strategic plan. City of Evansville itself probably needs a strategic plan. Maybe this helps or be a part of it, but I don't think it's an unreasonable goal.
And I think to Matt's point, part of what House needs to do is be part of creating that awareness amongst the citizens of Evansville. Many of them just simply are out of the loop. They don't see the problem neighborhoods that are deteriorating because they get on the Lloyd Expressway and they drive from one side of town to the other and they never see it. And to give the House members some credit, our nonprofit housing developers are doing an amazing job. They have met the goals that they set for the Promise Zone within the first 2 years, and they are continuing to build more affordable housing. We even have some for-profit developers who come in and are doing large projects, and those are very, very good. What we need to do is to be involved in strategy, and we need to look at some policy because we need to strive to change some of those policies. They kind of shoot ourselves in the foot by not allowing us to take the greatest advantage of assets that we have, such as the land bank. And to give the city credit, they've done some very good collaboration with some of our nonprofit housing developers as far as putting property in their hand where they can either take structures on the property or most of the time have to be demolished and create affordable housing in strategic places where the people who live there have access to public transportation and to walkable neighborhoods and amenities nearby. Medical clinics, grocery stores are still working on getting one of those in a key area. But we have to drive some changes in some of those policies that shoot ourselves in the foot. And some of our limitations come from state law regarding housing, which very much favors property owners and gives renters very little rights. So we need to be behind driving a better balance of that. And some of that's going to require some state level advocacy and some coalition building across the state, because those are issues that affect every city, not just Evansville.
Either one of you?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Oh, could you give us an overview of the affordable housing needs in Evansville?
Okay. I can. And Matt, you were on mute too. The number that we've been working with is about 1,500 affordable units that the city needs to add yet. And this number comes from that Bowen report that the city commissions. We have a very high occupancy rate on our rental properties, which drives rents up. A balanced market for rentals is about 95% occupancy. Evansville's up around 97 to 98%. Um, and the people who need the housing are divided into several income groups. The very low income, people making 25,000 and less, low income, 25 to 49,000, and the moderate to high income, people who make more than $50,000 a year. And it's easy to understand how the greatest need is in those two lower groups. Um, we do need to target that. Most of the housing is going to have to be subsidized. There will be some permanent supportive housing in there. Um, but we also need, the numbers tell you part of the story, but you need to dig a little deeper and need to look into those groups of people and understand who they are. Are they families? They retirees? Are they single people? Are they homeless people? And, what categories do they fall in and what kind of housing do they need? And what are their corresponding needs that go hand in hand with their need for housing? So that's what we have right now. We have the numbers, and we need to dig deeper.
Some of the ranges of rents are as about 700 for a one-bedroom apartment, all the way up to about 1,150 for a three-bedroom apartment. The going market rate. The median gross rent's about $775, and if you think of people who are on fixed incomes with SSI or what have you, those rents are going to gobble up a significant portion of your of what you pay for rent. When we talk about affordable housing, it's usually 30% and under of somebody's gross income. Between 30 and 50% of that we would consider burden, and above 50% is or cost burden, and above 50% would be severely cost burden. And so there are a lot of households that are in that mix between 30 and above, and many of them 50 and above. That's unsustainable. That's not considered affordable if you are above 30%. And Evansville has those challenges with the high occupancy and just low wages. We have our median household income is below the national average, as well as a lot of other indicators. So it's hard to keep up with that. For having lower costs, if you will, we certainly suffer from having some of the higher rents in this region and in the United States.
All right, and to illustrate that point about us being a low uh, income area, which Matt mentioned, Evansville's area median income is just a little over $41,000, and that's not a lot when you consider a median as half of the people make more and half the people make less. And if you look on the Out of Reach website that's published by the National Low Income Housing Coalition, they estimate how much of a hourly wage a person would have to earn in order to afford a modest two-bedroom apartment in a certain state. And in Indiana, you'd have to earn over $16 an hour just to have a modest apartment. That's not getting ahead, and that's not taking into consideration how many children you might have. So if you've got a large family, you've got 3, 4, 5 children or more, you're not going to be able to even afford a modest two-bedroom apartment for your family.
And another thing we have to link to the housing issues now is the cost of utilities. And we're seeing some of the higher, and many of you on this webinar certainly know this, and AARP Indiana knows this, with the cost of utilities. And I'm glad the question that just popped up is usually a part of that. It's considered 30% or lower of all your gross income on housing related expenses. I've seen definitions that say just rent and mortgage payments, but it's important to include utilities as well. Whatever costs you have to keep you housed should not be under that, above that 30, and certainly not above that 50% mark. And so we're seeing, obviously, so many of you know, we're seeing huge spikes in utility costs that are often unexplained and unjustified right now with our new utility provider, CenterPoint. We are shouldering the burden of corporate decisions in Texas right now for our folks back here. And it's not only hurting, it's hurting everybody across the board, but certainly those the most housing insecure and the most housing vulnerable. I don't know what the average is it's hard, but if you look at certain places where the housing is substandard, you may have units where you're paying as much for the bill utility as the square footage of your unit. I've seen instances where you have a 400 square foot unit, you're paying $400 a month for utilities. That's unsustainable.
Utilities are not typically included in the rental cost of an apartment. A few do, the majority do not, which leads to additional problems because if people have unpaid utility bills, then landlords don't want them because then they will get evicted for not paying the utility bill again. And the problem with some of our less savory landlords is they buy up a lot of these dilapidated old houses, slap a coat of paint on them, and rent them out. Sometimes they pick them up at the sheriff's sale for $50 a piece, and they rent them out for $500 or $600. Well, most of these old homes were built back in the 20s and 30s and 40s when builders didn't insulate these houses, and they're old. They've been poorly maintained. They're drafty. A lot of times the roofs are bad. And what happens is a family moves in there and they can afford $500 a month rent, and then they get a utility bill for heating in the middle of the winter. That's $700 or $800, and they can't pay it.
And it goes well above that, yeah.
And they end up getting evicted because they can't pay the utility bill.
Yeah.
And so they move on to another house and they can't get utilities in their name because they haven't paid the bill on the last one. I don't know how many of us could sustainably pay a $700 or $800 a month utility bill. I might have to give up some luxuries like food to do that.
But it makes it difficult to fit that 30% threshold we're talking about if you include utilities and other things in the total cost of keeping you housed. It makes it unsustainable to really have a situation that lends itself to be affordable if the utility costs are out of control.
Right.
And they're some of the highest in the country to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
And adding this burden we've been seeing recently with the spiked cost.
Yeah, it creates a vicious cycle, and it just drags people deeper and deeper and deeper into poverty, and to the point where they can't get out.
Okay, well, thank you. The City of Evansville has an affordable housing trust fund. Can you tell us what the purpose of the trust fund is and how it functions?
The trust fund was created out of an ordinance passed by the city council to address affordable housing needs and provide a funding stream to help homeowners, help individuals, help anybody involved in the developing of affordable housing to access funds. It's created and it's maintained by an appropriation every year by the City of Evansville of $500,000. And a lot of that money comes from a portion of income that is earned from a casino and riverboat casino gaming revenues. And so it's not an automatic line item. It's something that's negotiated, and it comes from that source. And we have a lot of community activists, including CAGE, Congregation Action for Justice and Empowerment, who advocate for a larger piece of that. Now, that fund can be given in the form of loans and grants, and it's governed by an advisory committee of which Ruth and I are a part of, that will make decisions or provide advisory support on applications that come before, and they can come from any kind of constituency groups. Large asks from folks who usually require approval from the city council.
Okay. Several weeks ago, the Evansville City Council unanimously passed an ordinance to appropriate $5 million from the American Rescue Plan funding to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. What does this infusion of new federal dollars mean for housing in the Evansville community?
It sounds like a lot of money when you first hear it, and the $5 million is going to be this year as well as next year. So it's a total of $10 million. But these are American Rescue Plan funds. They are federal dollars. They will probably not be repeated. But if you take $5 million and you look at a shortage of 1,500 units, that's a little over $3,300 a unit. So we're looking at gap funding. We're looking at helping people with down payment assistance. I don't think we're going to build any huge apartment complexes with that money. And what the developers do, or especially the nonprofiters, they go get all the rest of their capital lined up. And if they're almost to what they need and there's a gap between what they have and what they need, then they come to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And if we can, and if the project qualifies, we'll try to fill that gap so that they can build the project.
And then that helps those, if someone who's going to obtain the mortgage on that the cost of them purchasing the home is reduced as a result of the gap funding being filled, if you will. Yeah. And we're intrigued by that gap funding approach because we've seen best practices in other cities. Louisville, Kentucky being one. They have an affordable housing trust fund. Columbus, Ohio, where they're using monies that they've secured to address the housing shortages through gap funding. If we're at 1,500 units of affordable housing that we need in this community, and we're still seeing projects coming up, the cycle is continuous. And so we even if we're building a lot of stuff and it looks like it's there, there's going to be that need for a long time. And so this helps close that gap, if you will, even quicker than taking 150,000 per unit. That would really, if you took 5 and divided by how much it would cost to build those units, you wouldn't have many housing units. So this solves the problem in a greater way, and it incents and entices developers, non and for profit, for doing this through the gap funding approach.
Okay. You both serve as members on this Affordable Housing Trust Advisory Committee. This is a 2-part question. The first part is, what is your role on the committee? And the second part is, how would you like to see part of this $5 million leverage to support affordable housing development? What's your
I would like to see what we're serving on this. I've been in our second year, and the committee meets every other month to essentially receive applications that come before the Department of Metropolitan Development in the city that sort of have supervisory role over this committee. And we receive applications and discuss the merits of that and approve and provide our recommendations, if you will, that will essentially, we have no final say on any of this. We just provide our recommendation. And, right. And if it's a funding request, the funding request has to be formally approved by the city council. So Kelly Coors, the executive director of Department of Metropolitan Development, who sits on this committee, will go in front of the city council to say, this is what has been advised and proposed and given the endorsement by our committee. So we meet. It's just a lot of it is working on those sorts of things. It's got a transactional nature to it. I'm interested in Ruth and I as through kind of our roles in house. We're in both hats. We see this as having the capacity to do more. So that's the second part of the $5 million leverage. Hopefully, perhaps it's using gap funding, but incent private donations that perhaps could our private philanthropy could other banks and other institutions provide some leverage to match some of those funds. And I say that because in Louisville, Kentucky, they do that. They have a fund for which, yes, the government is the biggest contributor to it, and it should be. They've been able to use whatever monies they get each year to match it or leverage it with private donations. So perhaps that could be some conversations that could happen, that the 5, for each year could become, double or matched if it's brought into that, where it's, and what's great about it, it's a clearinghouse. It's not one specific group. You're not giving it to one specific developer. You're giving it to, a committee that obviously is vetting which proposals are coming in, but it's sort of that public as opposed to it just being individual entities.
The biggest difference between Evansville's Affordable Housing Trust Fund and Louisville or Columbus, Ohio, which are the two that we look to as leading practices, is Evansville's is still part of city government. Louisville and Columbus are both independent 501c3 organizations with their own executive directors who can go out and develop and solicit funds. Being independent, they can do their strategies. They can create their strategic values and their strategy for accomplishing their goals, which we don't do in Evansville. As Matt said, this group particularly is largely transactional. It isn't reaching its potential right now and is not attracting outside donations because it isn't accountable that much to the community. It doesn't have a strategy. And if you're going to have banks and insurance companies and other people investing in you, they have to see a return on investment. And this Affordable Housing Trust Fund in Evansville cannot produce a return on investment. They're not in a position to do that. So that's what we hope for in the future.
And a lot of people would say the advocates that have certainly been very, very vocal about supporting a trust fund, a $500,000 appropriation every year is inadequate. It would be Louisville, for instance, has had its growing pains, and if you think of Louisville, maybe about 4 times the size of Evansville and Vanderburgh counties, sort of appropriate kind of scale comparison. They have a budget of almost $10 million, and a lot of that comes from the city government. So if you think about, okay, if it was a scale, Louisville was never thinking about $2 million. I was thinking much more. So if you compare the scales, our size should be $2.5 million, and in fact, Cage has advocated $2 million. So that lack of amount just shows where the sort of the priorities of city government in terms of funding this are, and there is that gap between that approach politically and the political will or lack thereof versus the actual need of what's out there and to fund it. That yes, gap funding, being creative, trying to squeeze more, out of less can only go so far. But yes, gap funding would be great, but you might still need, $5 million in the gap funding is gonna go quick.
Right.
It will.
Go quick if you do it per unit, but even with the gap funding, that's not going to be as sustaining as each development gets this per unit or something or that. Well, the need keeps getting grower and grower. That's growing and growing. That $5 million this year, next year is inadequate, and it's one-time federal funds. Not funds.
Go ahead.
That are coming from city county.
Do you ever see Evansville's housing trust fund breaking away from the city government and operating more like Columbus and Louisville as an independent?
It would have to have several things that have to be certainly a city ordinance or something, and there'd have to be commitment on advocacy on all levels to take this thing to that level. We've provided information and research on the best practices, and it sort of remains there. But if it was able to become something, and it doesn't mean you're taking away any power or authority from what exists, you're just reconstituting it into something that can have a greater capacity and have a greater reach. And we want as researchers, we want national best practices to inform decisions. Yes, we understand they're political decisions, but a lot of political decisions can be made by having the appropriate amount of research, the appropriate amount of information available to make an appropriate policy decision.
Right.
And that's where it is. We presented some of these things at a little Q&A at the city council, and so it's obviously up to them. They'd have to amend the ordinance or reconstitute it, but it's the potential's there to see it. Even if it's not a 501c3, we've been told that yes, private funds can be received at this moment. I don't think anybody really knows it. I think it's a matter of seeing more. Is it so low that we're not seeing the impetus to match? 500,000 is 500,000, and that's low. And if it's much more, there isn't any of that impetus right now to increase it, and it's only being increased because of the one-time fund.
Yeah, right. Well, the city budgets are always tight, And that makes it increasingly difficult to create the political will to make a change for something like our Affordable Housing Trust Fund to reach its potential. So that means that when this comprehensive strategy is developed, a very important part of that is creating the political will, and that is creating community-wide awareness that it's not just building houses. It's not just cleaning up neighborhoods. When you build affordable, stable, safe housing in decent, safe neighborhoods, you stabilize families. You make it possible for the kids to stay in the same school and not disrupt their social networks during their formative years. You make it possible for parents to get adequate sleep and be able to hold down a job. They have an address. If you apply for a job, you have to put your address on a job application. Some people don't have that. You stabilize education, you stabilize families. When people own homes, they stay in the same neighborhoods. And when people stay in the same neighborhoods, there's eyes on the street. Okay, this decreases crime, and there are research studies out there that show that the eyes on the street do lower crime rates. So you're improving education, you're improving employment. This is part of a community-wide improvement plan, and housing is the foundation of it.
Okay. As you guys know, AARP Indiana's housing priorities promote aging in place. Um, and as an occupational therapist, I'm all for that, which means allowing individuals to live independently in their own home and community as long as they choose. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund can also be used, it's my understanding, to pay for essential home repairs and accessibility modifications to keep qualifying Evansville residents in their homes longer rather than going to, assisted living or nursing home or whatever.
Mhm.
Do you have any insight in how the trust fund can support those repairs and modifications to keep people in their homes for longer amounts of time?
Sure. One thing that and when we were saying some of the things before, with regards to other approaches of gap funding, it doesn't mean that any other requests would be discounted. It's a balanced approach would work. You have to determine sort of what you would allocate, what for what and what for the other. But yes, having the requests that have been brought before have been individual homeowners who have requested um, repairs or modifications. The one thing that has to happen is, in order for any monies to be received, homeowner receives money, their home must be brought up to code, and through an Evansville building inspector. If it's not brought to code, that allocation, or whether loan or grant, cannot be given. So sometimes that can be a barrier, and that's just something of a building commission DMD policy, that the need is there and it's there, and
Mhm.
monies will have to be spent before they get monies. And so that's one challenge that happens. But yes, if the building's meant to code, yes, any there's a lot of latitude in whatever can be brought, in terms of requesting. Because the one thing that, and I think members of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and people who are advocates of affordable housing attest to this, and this is why it's so important AARP's in those discussions, is it's not just building the new nice shiny house. It's, what about that person that's been living in that home 50 years? It
Mhm.
needs to be there and needs to be stable while they're living there, as they're seeing their property values go up, as they're seeing the property taxes going up, they're seeing utilities. And so anything that can be done to help that elderly homeowner, it's very, very important. Yeah, there isn't, this is where we say strategic plan. It would be, for the fund, what should it look like in terms of what it decides to allocate? And then pretty much right now, it's just whatever applications come forth. Some have been, I need $38,000 to help with some of this, and some of that has been great, as long as the building or home has been brought up to code.
Yeah. The application.
That can be the biggest challenge, because it might not be on the code.
Can any of those monies be used to bring the home up to code so then they can do the modifications?
They don't want to see the value of the house. And that's an issue they
Right.
run into sometimes, is the house is in such desperate need of so much repair that what they're asking for, it would cost more than the house is worth.
It's worth, yeah.
Another stipulation on doing these projects is that the money in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is for individuals and families whose income is at or below 80% of the area median income. So that's around $33,000. And half of that has to go to people in the lowest income group, which is 25,000 or less. So you have to qualify income wise. The application's on the city's website. It's pretty cumbersome to navigate. Um, a lot of people would need some assistance to get their application in. But if they can manage to do that, then the committee would definitely review that.
And we encourage that because there's a lot of, this is where we think the capacity for the fund is greater, because we are only presented we are only acting upon what's presented before us. And in the grand scheme of things in a given year, we don't vet a lot of applications. And as advocates and researchers, I'd love to be put to work more, in terms of really having enough. And so that might be, as the root of the test is a lack of information, lack of people don't know. And I think there's an assumption that even the advocates and the developers and providers know. And we learned through some of our time working in house, there are some of your most prominent housing developers who had little to no knowledge of the Evansville Affordable Housing Trust Fund. They didn't really know much about it at all. They've learned and educated and have used it. And that's what's extremely important too. There's always this thing when it comes to these things, the political angle of this. And in a previous iteration of the city council, Kelly yours would always be, I have to demonstrate usage of this fund. And that's not the sole reason why it was always kept at 500,000 or potentially that. There's other reasons, but if you're going to get what little you have to demonstrate the use of it. And there were some members of the city council that are on now who were concerned of, okay, nobody's applying. There were periods where nobody was, and I think a lot had to do with education and exposure. And so, and certainly AARP can be the perfect one to be, hey, this is here, this is available. Go to the website, go to the application. Yes, it's cumbersome, but we all will help whoever is coming through. I want to see lots of applications, because there's another thing this side of it. Let's say, you're there, obviously we'd have to make some decisions. And if we spend every last penny, then that changes the dynamics a little bit. Then maybe there is more evidence or will to be, wow, 500 grand really isn't enough.
All right.
And maybe it needs one or two, and you're just doing it just because you're up against it. You have to almost force the choice, force the decision. That isn't happening because, while advocates see that this is an inadequate appropriation, it's not all being spent all the time.
Right.
Maybe more recently now, but sometimes it wasn't.
Can people get help filling out this application? And if so, where would they go to get the help?
Well, they certainly can go to the City of Evansville Department of Metropolitan Development. They have a very dedicated staff that can help walk you through parts of that. I would say, I wish I had the website. It was a good question, but certainly they can contact Ruth and I as members of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Committee. But it's Department of Metropolitan Development, DMD. And the City of Evansville would be that. And even if it's there, they're very helpful in answering questions.
Mm-hmm. Or if you have a knowledgeable friend or family member, they can help.
Okay. Great. This has been very enlightening. Is there any other information you would like to share or plug for our virtual audience today?
I think it's just continuing to be advocates for the needs for affordable housing. I think AARP serves a tremendous role in understanding and being advocates for these important issues in very constructive ways. We have other advocates in our community whose styles and temperaments are different, and sometimes their effectiveness has been called into question. So I think AARP fulfills a good place and space in educating its members of these kinds of technical housing issues that a lot of advocates are sort of the aging in place people, and there are folks I work with, USIU, Ruth used to work with Janet, who the housing piece is not on their radar, and for those that are aging in place, it needs to be. And so that they're the idea of, yes, they're all sort of symbiotic. And so I think it's just continuing to educate your members, being on top of those trends that are going on, understanding trends, understanding markets, understanding costs, and then just being advocates for pushing for it, because it's holistic, as we've been saying. You create housing stability, you're creating stable communities and stable neighborhoods, and that provides it all. So that's why it's important. And then that breaks up into the community development realm, and in including and growing and enhancing the quality of life of communities, because the housing just doesn't stop at the front door or the front porch.
Right.
It affects the communities that we're at. So by advocating for good housing, you're advocating for strong communities, strong neighborhoods.
Good point, Matt. I like that.
Do we have any questions from our audience?
Hi, everybody.
Hi, Linda.
Hi, Linda.
Sorry about the late show up, but technology and I are not best friends. So. Wonderful information. Wonderful information. I haven't seen any questions. Let's see. Do you see that on your screen? What is considered affordable housing according to monthly rent or payment? I'm one who will need income-based housing in a safe environment.
That's a good question. It's not the way the definition, federal definition, is never a set number. It's 30% or lower of one's gross income on housing and utilities. So that matters, obviously, if you've got the fixed.
And remember to include utilities.
Yeah, and critical utilities. Some people don't use it, but other utilities are important, because that's what good is your housing if you're cold or hot. But yeah, 30% of gross. So if you're earning $1,000 a month, you shouldn't be spending more than $300 on all of that. And we find that's
if you're a person who is with a Social Security check, if you got $1,000 a month after you pay your Medicare premiums and your income taxes, you will need subsidized housing, basically, for it to be affordable for you.
Yeah, and so we've had these, so it differs. Sort of, we have, if you have the rents are $774, the median gross rent in Evansville, to do the math there, and I think I mentioned some stats of $700 to $1,100 for 1 to 3 bedrooms. And so, do the math that you really have those challenges. And if you're above 30%, you're cost burdened. And if you're above 50, you're severely cost burdened. So yeah, there isn't the number is going to fluctuate by location and market, but they usually use that percentage threshold to try to keep your housing costs under 30% of your income.
That's difficult. That's challenging.
That's difficult.
And you can get that through organizations like Evansville Housing Authority or Echo Community Housing. Not sure who else has that kind of subsidized housing in Evansville, but you're going to be limited in your options. And they're not bad. I mean, they're often located towards, around public transportation. And the city has been really nice. They have a little trolley, and they run it a couple of days a week to take people to the grocery store. So the city has done some good things too, to work with these affordable housing developers, especially the nonprofit ones.
And they also have groups like CAPE, and they have other organizations that can provide community action programs that can provide utility assistance. Those monthly kind of assistance is the townships. A Night and Pigeon are very helpful in providing some of that. But it's a never-ending cycle. If we're seeing if we already had high utility costs, high rents, and the rents keep going up, the utilities are going up, as sort of what I was explaining a little bit earlier. It's kind of this cycle. If I remember, maybe correct me, I think the mayor is dedicating $4.5 million of this of the monies he got just for utility assistance. And so yes, that pot will be available for those that are challenged with that respect. But yeah, this is what happens when you have gaps in income and you have rents going up, and then you have the rents are based upon some landlords that are charging rents to earn profit and don't provide the adequate services to the people that are renting.
Yeah.
So are we seeing the new developers like the apartments that are going up on Main Street where the old Great Scott used to be? I know there are a couple of different sections of the building. Are we see them putting in extra insulation or extra to keep the utility bills down?
Yeah, you're going to always see new construction have better quality that respect, but then it depends upon the cost of the unit. You know, could those do you know the asking rents for those new units on
They're very expensive. They're very expensive, and I think only about 10% of them are going to be subsidized. So there's not very much opportunity there. There's a little bit of opportunity, but most of those vast majority are market rate. Now, the nice thing about that development, it's called the Forge, is that the ground floor is going to be offices, and they're trying to put a grocery store in there. That little difficult to find one that's willing to go in that location because the grocery stores depend on a lot of foot traffic.
Right.
And a lot of the houses around that area are currently vacant. Some of them need to be demolished. It's a brownfield area. There's some soil contamination that has to be cleaned up by the EPA before they can safely build on it. So there's just things making the process go slowly. But I think that the DMD director said that there's another development going to go in right next to that. And the best advantage to that, which would get me to move down there, is it's right next to Zesto. The best bread and tenderloins in town. I'd be over there every day for lunch, and I would be so fat I couldn't get through the door.
Yes. And I think they built that there, thinking of the hospitals and the very plastics and easy walkability to kind of cut down on.
And they combined that with the Complete Streets work that they did on North Main Street several years ago, which I have to applaud whoever at the city developed that, did such a wonderful job. And it's the basis for some good development to come in. There's still a lot of old buildings, some that need to go, some that I think fell down. So we need to make sure that happens, but it needs to happen in a good way so that becomes a really desirable destination. And part of that strategy is to develop the neighborhoods surrounding it so that it's a walkable destination for people.
Okay. Well, don't see any other. Oh, Karen wants to know, why do you use gross income and not net income?
That's HUD's definition.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's not a perfect measure because 30% for somebody making $10,000 a year is a whole lot different than 30% for somebody making $500,000 a year. So that came from a housing act from back in the 1930s, and for some reason it stuck because it's easy for people to figure that out. But that isn't the best measure. We just don't have a better one.
Right.
Or change the law to make it better.
Okay. Well, thanks, Janet, for leading us through that discussion. Don't see any other questions from the viewers, so I do want to thank Dr. Metzger and Dr. Hauke for providing time to answer these very valuable, this is valuable information, and you have very busy schedules, so we really do appreciate your coming in and letting us pick your brain on what's going on.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Glad
Thank
to do
you.
it.
Thank you for the opportunity.
AARP Indiana is committed to advocating for housing that promotes the ability of all Hoosiers to age in place and their communities for as long as they can, regardless of their age, disability, or income levels. So I think this has been great information that everyone can use. They can check in. You guys can check back with us at the email address on the screen for updates on AARP's efforts. And everyone in the audience, feel free to share this video to help spread the word, to get the information out. Thanks again for all of you, and have a great day.
You
Thank you very
too.
much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Linda.
Bye.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you.